Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a game from the 2013 Alekhine Memorial between Liren Ding, playing as white, and Levon Aronian. This is a very nice positional game, one that will certainly draw our attention to pawn structure. We'll see many shifts in the pawn structure, and I believe best illustrated is a space disadvantage in this game. And we'll see how exactly that influences the relative value of the pieces. So again, in this game, Liren, he had the white side, opening with d4, Levon replying d5, c4, c6, the Slav defense. Both king knights come out, knight c3, and a6. You'll notice on this move 4, if black captures, white can regain the pawn in the following way. After a4, a6 is not a way to defend, because at the end of it, the rook would be unprotected. And so if it is to get to this point, after b4, knight a2, the short story here is that white will win one of the pawns back. In the game after a6, black is now getting ready to take the pawn and hang on to it. One of the ideas behind this move is, oddly enough, to influence white's queen bishop. Generally speaking, we like to have our bishops deployed outside of the pawn chain, with bishop g5 and then e3, but this, of course, would come not without a cost. In this case, black again can capture and hang on to c4. You'll notice this is coming one more move, well, it's falling one move short. These a6 and bishop b7 ideas, the rook is now secure, b5 is secure, which implies c4 would now live. e3 was played, preparing to simply meet captures with the recapture. e6, the Semi-Slav, accelerated Meran variation, and now c5. Grabbing some queenside space, controlling b6 and d6. Both are holes in the black position, and it's a decision point now for black to live with this pawn on the c5 square or chip away at it with b6 right away. In the game it was knight b to d7, and black is going to try to work around this queenside space deficit. b4 is the follow-up, b6, bishop b2, a5, a3. b4 is reinforced, which means that c5 will be maintained. If black really wants to get rid of that pawn, he must strike at it right now, prior to this knight move. After b6, there's now not going to be a way to maintain the pawn on c5, because similar to what I showed from the black side of it, these lines here, well, now it's a case where it's the white rook who's in trouble and now unprotected. So, it is in the game knight b d7, b4, b6, bishop b2, a5, a3. Both king bishops come out, both sides castle, and now bishop to a6. Why is it the case that black is playing this position with a space deficit, right? Having to work around this pawn on c5 when I just showed a way that black could have eliminated that. If we have a look at that variation a little bit more closely, this one here where black plays b6 right away, the follow-up c takes b, which is best, just playing out a few more moves, you'll notice black is not without some issues still in this position. In particular, you'll notice that the white pieces have a great amount of activity on the queen side of the board. Bishop's doing very well to work on adjacent diagonals, playing out a few more moves here. And you'll notice follow-up ideas, if, let's just say, I'm not saying this is best in any way, but just to highlight some of the activity that we could be seeing on the white side. Again, this rook is ideally placed. Bishop's functioning very well. We could one day maybe even see ideas of bishop a5, potentially invading here, maybe even b4, knight c5 ideas. And this bishop, you'll notice, is still around on the board. They're bad bishop. They're still having to try and get him into a productive position, tried to exchange him off, but that's not so easily accomplished. If we compare that with what was played in the game, you'll notice while black has a space deficit in this case, you'll notice they were also successful with something else. There's now going to be this bad bishop for a good bishop exchange. So that's some of the give and take. Those are some of the pros and cons with those two pawn structures. Yes, as black, you can get rid of this c5 pawn, but you maybe have some trouble with your light square bishop and exchanging him off, or you could play this position here where you do have this problem with the space disadvantage, and the light square bishops in this case will be exchanged. Okay. After bishop a6, knight e1 is played, preparing to recapture with the knight. This is a very nice square for white knight. As a follow-up, we have bishop to c4. One of the critical moves here, one move to certainly consider on the black side, is e5. And I say this because after knight to e1, you'll notice he's no longer around to watch over the e5 square. So maybe this is an opportunity, in other words, for black to strike at the white center with e5. This, of course, is now without some complications. You'll notice if e5 was played in this position, white can maybe grab on a6, inconvenience the black rook, strike at the black rook with b5, landing a fork here. This can get very messy. I'm not going to go into this particular variation, but it's suggesting e takes d, and it just gets very, very crazy. But just want to highlight this idea with b5 to show you if c takes b, we have c6 hitting the knight, and if he moves, we're going to have d takes e, and this pawn's ready to go into Pac-Man mode, grabbing the knight and the bishop, and before you know it, d5 can be collapsing. And this rook, not the brightest piece in the world. Just want to show you some of the complications that can arise if we have the move e5. It could get very messy. We could enter an unbalanced position. In the game, it was bishop c4, and now bishop takes bishop, pawn takes. It's important for white to capture this bishop right now. If given time, black will play b5 and then be in a position to recapture on c4 with the b pawn. And we'll see how exactly that's different. You'll notice by white immediately capturing, black has to take away from the center. With this structural shift, what has changed exactly after d takes c? D file is half open. Black has a passed pawn, soon to be a connected passed pawn. And maybe the biggest of all, white now has a 2-to-1 majority in the center. Queen to e2 is the follow-up. This pawn is hit. Rook b8 is indirectly defending this pawn. If queen takes pawn here, there would follow b takes c, d takes c, and you'll notice black can take on c5, because if the knight is recaptured, the bishop will fall. So white addresses this threat right here against the bishop by playing rook to a2. So now this is back on, and now it's defended with b5. The queen side is now closed. Black has a connected pawn, and there's really not going to be anything at all happening on the queen side of the board. Now, as we'll soon see in this game, having rooks on the board is going to be a bit problematic for the black side. Black having a space disadvantage is the one who would really like to have some exchanges. We'll see the black rooks in this game really don't contribute well at all. Now, I'm bringing this point up because one other direction that black could maybe have gone in is to not play bishop c4. You'll notice in this line here, after bishop c4 takes, pretty much by force, because of the pressure on c4, after addressing this tactical threat on the bishop, eventually black has to do what? Has to play b5, close the position in order to save the pawn. And by doing this, the rooks are not so easily exchanged. If black wants to exchange some pieces, this is an alternative. Instead of bishop c4 to exchange bishops, play queen c7, let's just say queen here, queen b7, and now be in a spot to, let's say, capture, and get this other rook over here. In this way, more exchanges are occurring, and black benefits as a result of that, again, being the side who has a space disadvantage. These exchanges are going to be welcome. We didn't have that. It was bishop c4. Bishop takes, pawn takes, queen e2. After rook a2, again, it was b5. The queen side is closed. Where do we proceed from here? This is an important point in the game. It's important to really assess this position correctly and come up with the correct move on this move 16. If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what move you would play as white. Okay, the move here is e4. And this is a very important move to play right now. There are many things white needs to do. 1, regroup the rook. He's no longer needed to watch over the bishop. 2, regroup the knight. He's not good on e1. He's not good on the back rank. Another one, this e4 move, this is the most important, and it's important that it's played again right now. If you're playing something other than e4 right now, such as rook a1 or knight c2, you're allowing black to do what? You're allowing black to play knight d5, and what is this doing? Welcoming exchanges. White should not allow black to exchange a pair of knights. It's important to control d5 immediately, and then do these rook a1, knight c2, as we'll soon see, bishop c1 ideas, rerouting the bishop on this diagonal. Okay, so as a follow-up, rook b7, preparing to come over to the d file to double rooks and open up the b8 square. This knight is going to go for a little journey. b8, a6, c7, where we'll eye up the d5 square. Black is preparing to meet a move like e5 with jumping a knight right into this square. Knight c2, knight b8, rook a1, a lot of reorganizing of the pieces. Rook d1, rook d8, bishop c1, knight a6, bishop f4. The rooks are doubled. We have a flight square in there. The knight is retreating, so the bishop can play to f6 and exert more pressure on d4. Queen e3, preparing to shift over. This is a nice diagonal. It's also good to be opposite the king. There might one day be bishop h6, inducing some dark square weaknesses. You'll notice there's really not a good way to play on the queen side of the board for black. You'll notice this pawn at any moment can be capturing on b4, but if we take note of the interesting position of these two knights, what are they doing exactly? They're ruling out any potential entry point by any of the black heavy pieces on the a file. The knights have these four and the pawn has the one on a5. There's no way to make progress on the queen side. The attention here is shifting towards the center of the board. Queen e3 it is, bishop f6, and now e5 with tempo. This gives up d5, but we have very nice control over the d6 square. Bishop e7, white hops right in there. Knight e4, knight c7, knight d6, throws a punch at the queen, queen a8, queen g3, knight d5, and now knight e3. This last move here, I believe, had a lot of calculation behind it. as black here, how would you follow up? If you'd like to, pause the video, see if you can figure out what move you would play as black. Okay, the move here is knight c3. The rook is hit, but more than that, the knight is ready to land to e2 with the fork. So the rook has to react and defend e2. Rook to e1 it is. Bishop takes knight. He really couldn't be tolerated on d6 for much longer, and the primary reason is of getting rid of him for right now is black wants to make use of this e4 square. So it's e takes d, knight e4, hitting the queen, and after queen h4, knight d2. The rook is hit, and, well, he's going to be won. Black will win the exchange now with this sequence of moves. He started out on d5, he played into c3, e4 with tempo, d2, and now he's going to pick up the exchange by force. Well, what's the follow-up exactly? Again, I believe from that move 28, knight to e3, this was all calculated. The follow-up here is knight d5. What a sharp move. Discovered attack on the knight and preparing to set up an in-between move. After knight takes rook, we don't do anything about the knight just yet, but instead reposition on b6, entering the queen side and doing a ton of damage, hitting both rook and queen. The queen reacts, and now rook takes knight. This is the one move that I had the most difficulty with. I couldn't really understand why it was rook takes instead of king takes. I didn't understand a reason why to pull the rook off of this half-open file. The only thing that I can maybe come up with is maybe you wanted to stay out of potential checking ideas. I'm not completely sure, to be perfectly honest. Something like this maybe one day wanted to stay out of some ideas of a check and maybe coming over towards the king side in some way to defend. I'm not exactly sure. But okay, in the game it was rook takes knight, knight f6. There's no reason to take this rook. He can't go anywhere anyway because of the pressure on the rook on d8. So knight f6, this is an opportunity for white to go ahead and grab the rook, but is assigning more value to this knight. I was talking before the game about the relative value of the pieces. Well, notice with this great space disadvantage that black is experiencing, having these two connected passed pawns, what type of value can you really place on these two black rooks? They're completely passive and doing absolutely nothing for the black side. The follow-up is bishop to e4, improving the bishop's position, moving forward, putting pressure on the black king side, the knight, the pawn indirectly. Knight d5, knight takes knight, not knight takes rook. This rook isn't doing anything. The knight is much more valuable than the rook on d7 due to this space advantage. Pawn on e takes, otherwise we would have two connected passed pawns. So e takes d, and now ripping the heart out of this black structure, bishop takes g7. He needs to be recaptured. You cannot live soon. If the bishop isn't taken, you're going to have the bishop backing up to f6, queen g5, queen g7, and then mate. King takes bishop is played. How are we doing material-wise? White is down a full rook, but white is completely winning. These rooks doing absolutely nothing. They're of no value in this position, and this queen, it's hard to imagine that she's doing anything so great either. Queen g5, king f8, queen f6 threatens mate. King g8, white repeats here. You'll notice that is move 40. I believe this was played in order to make time control and or gain some time on the clock. King f8, queen back to f6, and after king g8 again, we have something different. Rook e1, preparing some rook lift, e3 or e5, trying to get to the g file. And soon thereafter, mate. A takes b, and now the last big question. Which square to go to, or does it even matter? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what rook move you would play in this position. Rook e1 or rook to e5. Okay, the move here, the best move is rook e5. This is very important. If you play rook e3, you allow black a defensive resource. Queen takes a3, gladly being able to give that queen back, right? Rook g3, he's got to go. 2 connected passed pawns, 1 aggressive piece is not enough. The best white can do in this position is some perpetual check. Therefore, rook e5. Black stops rook g5 with h6. And now rook h5. It's important not to just grab this pawn and look for rook g5, because what do you allow black to now do? With the queen no longer on f6, you allow the move f6. And now all of a sudden, the queen and the rook are available for lateral defense. Therefore, it's rook h5, queen takes a3, and now what move to play next? If you'd like to, once again, pause the video, see what move you would play as white. Okay, the move here is queen takes pawn, and this is very important that you take with the queen. This may seem very appealing. Rook takes h6, preparing a mate in 1, but similar idea. Queen check. Black is in a position to eliminate that rook. The queen alone is not enough. You must maintain both the queen and the rook if you are to win as white. Queen takes h6, threatening queen h8 mate. f6 only prolongs the inevitable. Queen takes f6, and it is at this point that Aronian resigns. There's now not going to be a good way to defend against rook to h8 mate. Just to throw out one variation, keep in mind it's not just this here as a mate threat. Keep in mind what else is happening in the position. The queen is exerting pressure on the rook, so how do you defend against rook h8 mate? Rook g7, you pick up the rook, you could give a check. This is mate. If the king goes to g6, this is check, and this is checkmate. But as it was in this game, after queen to f6, certainly this last sequence of moves, not without some accuracy here, recognizing these defensive resources. Queen takes pawn here, preparing to sack the queen right back in a couple different lines. White was, of course, accurate, and again, after queen takes pawn on f6, it is again at this point that Aronian resigned. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.